Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back. Spirituality and culture is one and the same. And on the note of spirituality and culture, what it all boils down to, just like anything else, is its functionality. Many people over the world who get introduced to certain type of spirituality, whether they convert to Islam or whether they convert to some form of, quote, African spirituality, know that the culture and spirituality of Earth is one. It just takes form in different appearance based on what part of the world you're in, because each part of the world has a concentration or a condensed type of energy that causes the same attribute to express itself in a different way. That's the reason why you will have different types of vultures, different types of rabbits, different types of dogs, because these things have been cultivated based on their environment. They've adapted to their environment. Are there other factors that are man-made involved? Yes, there are. When it comes to animals, that can be genetic modification. But when it comes to spirituality, the man-made aspect will be what we call religion. So that's why you will see some animals that are so small, like little chihuahuas or any other type of small dogs, but you will see that they have genes of regular big dogs. That's because humans have at some point in the past genetically modified them. But naturally, before they were genetically modified, they naturally exist in certain habitats. But nonetheless, they're still dogs, just like you'll find other dogs in other habitats with different attributes. Some dogs are meant to run longer distance, some dogs are meant to just exercise short, quick bursts of power based on their environment. Well, same thing applies to spirituality and culture. The man-made version is the dogma aspect, which is given to people in form of what people perceive as religion, even though religion also has its use when it comes to the root word and all that. But nonetheless, religion has been the tool that's used to enslave people. But the spiritual aspect and the culture of it is all one and the same. No matter where you go, it just expresses itself differently. So when we speak about things regarding astrology, cosmogony, and things are extracted from Arabic transliterations, and then we speak about other things dealing with African spirituality, know that it's not isolated. Know that it's no different. Those who know that the culture on Earth is one. This is the reason why the Masons who keep these secrets behind closed door, you will see a Mason in North America dine and wine with a Mason in Great Britain, or dine and wine with a Mason in Australia, or dine and wine with a Mason in East or South Africa, because they all know that the culture on Earth is one. The layman who doesn't have previous information in the private that these Masons have basically kept to themselves should see things from that universal perspective also, rather than isolation. I grew up in a household whereby we practiced things along the line of African spirituality, but at the same time there was a homogenized aspect of Islam, whereby I would wake up one day, the Hadan will be called, we'll pray, then right after that there'll be a little fountain that's consecrated with water, and then the ritual when it comes to Yoruba spirituality will be done. It's not isolated. People do that swiftly and normally. It's a norm in other parts of the world. These same principles is what I'm going to introduce to you now. Depending on what your heart tells you, go there. I'm not saying these things to convert you into anything. Accept it if you want, don't, up to you. But know that everything exists for a reason, and tools exist within it that you can put to use. So those who have been loosely introduced to the concept of African spirituality, we hear this thing called the Orisha. Orisha constitutes of two separate words, the prefix being Ori, suffix being Sha. Ori being your divine self, or your basically the sacred aspect of you that goes beyond the five senses. And Sha just means to pick and gather. So when people speak about, say, Shangoy being one Orisha, or Oya being one Orisha, or Oshun being one Orisha, or Ososi being one Orisha, or Ishu being one Orisha, those are just literally the same people. We see the Orishas as ancestors, meaning they were physical people that walked the earth, just like you will look at me and I will look at you. And at some point, once you leave and finish your journey on this physical earth, identify you based on a synonymous act and the things that you primarily had as an attribute here, that you mastered that no one else could have done. And since we know that the spirit does not die because it cannot be created, and so because of that, it just doesn't die. We're consecrated based on certain attributes. And those same attributes can be pulled and called upon because those same attributes exist in you and I. It might be in minimal forms compared to that man or woman, but since it existed in a more consecrated form in that man or woman before they traverse into the ancestral realm, which they will always be with you and I, we can always invoke that power. Ori just means whatever destiny that man or woman had that was so strong and perfected. Have you ever heard of the fact that they tell you that there's never been a version of you and there will never be a version of you? That's what Ori is. That is, whenever someone tells you or whenever you tell yourself, I am that thing that no one else can compare, you're referring to your Ori. Or at least when a West African hears you speak about, people saying, oh, I'm the shit, I'm this and that. There's never been someone like me. What we hear is you're speaking about your Ori. You might not know it, but that's what you were talking about. But most of these, I'll just be forthcoming. Most West Africans would not have this conversation with you because the perspective that most people in the Western world view spirituality from is from trend and fashion. And no one has time to waste with people who are stuck in trend and fashion unless you're serious about it. Again, what I'm telling you, I'm not intending to convert you into anything. I'm telling you the strict, raw truth about how it works, and then we'll go into the functional aspect. But the roots of it has to be explained. Ori just refers to your destiny, your core, your higher self. Your core and your higher self deals with your destiny. Without that, whatever you do in path of life might not go well. That is why when you really start to get into quote African spirituality, you will get to a point where you will realize and they will teach you, and based on something called rite of passage, which male at the age of 9 go through and women at the age of 7 goes through. I don't know how it is in other so-called African cultures, but in West Africa, specifically Yoruba, that's how it is. So men at the age of 9 go through a rite of passage, 7 for women, they go through their rite of passage. And when they go through their rite of passage, what is revealed, one of the things that is revealed, which it's not a secret. So although many so-called West Africans or Yoruba people would not tell you this, but in my own biased opinion, I think information is a birthright that belongs to you and should not be isolated to anyone, because the culture on earth is one. Just because you're not privy to it doesn't mean you should be ignorant to it. Or just because you might not be willing to accept it now does not mean you shouldn't be aware of its existence, because one day that might be what you will need to assist you during the most subtle moments. And that might be the saving grace that you might have been looking for, but you just had no one to introduce it to you. So when these rite of passage goes on in these parts of the world, which of course in the Western world, most people don't go through that, what is revealed is that those Orisha that people worship, Obatala, Ishu, Oya, Ifa, all those people, since they were our ancestors, the greater one beyond those Orisha is you, because you yourself carry something called Ori. You yourself are an Orisha that's walking. You yourself are just like those ancestral spirits, because those ancestral spirits exist in you also. And they are merely Orisha, meaning they were destined spirits and souls that were concentrated into a body during perfected times during the cosmic cycles, cosmogony, which there's a system for that in Yoruba also. But they came during the right time, and they specialize in certain attributes and change the ebbs and flow of a specific group of people around that part of the world called the Yoruba people. So we deified them and turned them into ancestral spirits. The equivalent attribute exists in other parts of the world. For instance, Shango is synonymous with Uranus. Oya is synonymous with Pluto. Ifa is the sun. Ishu is Mercury. Oshun is Venus, so on and so forth. And when you begin to look at the colors and attributes involved in these things, and certain herbs that corresponds with these Orisha, and certain rites that corresponds with them, and certain things that you do with them, it directly aligns with cosmogony and things of that nature. This is the reason why culture on earth is one. And me telling you this thing is not something unique or isolated. It might not be a subject matter that people will break down to you, but it exists. And it is rightfully yours. It's up to you to accept it or let it go. That's up to you. I'm doing my part to tell you what you might have loosely heard of, but might not be too sure of. Or something others will not tell you. So we all carry about Ori, and you have that Ori. And in the Yoruba spirituality, there's an algorithm, very much like how the Chinese have their own form of divination, or the Greeks had something called abacamancy, and those in Saudi Arabia have their own form of divination called geomancy, which is basically using sand for divination. Well, in Yoruba spirituality, there's something called the Odu, and the Odu is basically based on algorithm of 0 and 1. And 0 and 1 is basically the same algorithm computers use because it is well comprehended based on past first-hand experience of these same orishas and ancestors, that what we look at here in a physical realm is nothing but another form of computer on a dense realm that moves slower, that functions based on another computer that moves faster. And there's a link to that, and that link is called Oduifa. And that algorithm of zeros and one has 256 paths. And each Orisha, for instance, and by the way, when I make reference to abacamancy, abacamancy is also known as amathamancy, from Greek word amathos, meaning sand, a form of divination based on the interpretation of the patterns of dust, dirt, salt, sand, or the ashes of the recently deceased. Reading the pattern is believed to give some insight into the future. Readers stop the drift, sand, and ashes on a flat surface and start looking for a pattern that might represent symbols or picture. Geomancy, on the other hand, is a Greek for earth divination, is a method of divination that interprets marking on the ground or the patterns formed by tossed handful of soil, rocks, or sand. This is where the concept of dice rolling comes from, which you will find in Egypt. Although people use dice rolling as a form of gamble today, but in truth, it was a form of divination. And those who know how to divine are usually very good at gambling. The most prevalent form of divinatory geomancy involves interpreting the series of 16 figures, formed by a randomized process that involves recursion, followed by analyzing them, often augmented with astrological interpretation, meaning astrology and divination goes hand in hand. Now in Yoruba, there's something called, and these will usually be the pattern that you will see in geomancy, which is sand divination. The same algorithm based on a pattern of 16. It's the same algorithm that exists in Yoruba Oduifa. Right here. So when you see one line that represents 0 and two line represents 1, and there are 256 total different patterns it can take based on a form of divination. And this word called Ifa is a name of an Orisha, aka an ancestor. So everything we do is based on, we term it based on those who came before us. Like you have any given county, a city, or a state named after someone who colonized it. Well, when it comes to systems of spirituality and culture, it is named after the progenitors that mastered those things and assist in the advancement of society. This is just an overview. This does not make you a professional at it. I'm just giving you a very, very extremely broad overview of it. So the system of divination in the Yoruba culture is Ifa, and Ifa was known as the master diviner, which is called the light of the world, and it's consecrated to the sun. So whenever you want to shed light to anything, you use divination, and the sun sheds lights to things. And there are 16 principles of those, just like it exists in geomancy. And those 16 principles, based on the fact that consciousness likes to observe itself, replicates itself in the form of duality. That duality, when it comes to the imprint of the seal itself, is represented by 2 pillars or 1 pillar. The 1 pillar represents 0, the 2 pillar represents 1. So these are just mathematical algorithms. And each of these 16 principles, since it represents itself in the duality form, it multiplies itself twice. So you would have a total of 256 paths. Ifa is a Yoruba religion and system of divination. Its literary corpus is the Oduifa. Orunmila is identified as the Grand Priest. Ifa is just another name used for Orunmila. Ifa is the name of the system itself. Grand Priest, as he is who revealed divinity and prophecy to the world. Ifa and Orunmila, same thing. Babalawo or Iyanifa use either the divining chain known as Okbele, or the sacred palm or kola nut called Ikin, on the wooden divinatory tray called Okmaifa, This 0.5 is basically a certain circular tray made of a certain type of wood, because each wood is consecrated to a certain planet. And based on the influence of those planets, the way certain things react to it when you consecrate on a spiritual level will cause the highest probability to come up when you use it for the purpose of divination. All these tools are basically, quote, magical tools that are consecrated to do certain things for the purpose of divination, to get the highest and the most accurate thing rather than merely, quote, guessing. So things can be pinpointed extremely accurately. But to not go too far into this, Ifa being one of the Orisha, and we show this to let you know that each of those Orishas have their attribute. So Ifa is known as the ancestral spirit or the energy of divination. Ogun for war, aka Mars. Oshun for childbirth, protection, love, prosperity, wealth, to decrease famine and increase harvest, etc., etc., with each of them. As above, so below. The principle and culture in earth is one. And within all these ancestral spirits consecrated to some cosmic body, because as above, so below again, you will find that just like the cosmic bodies have positive influence, there are also negative influence within these ancestral spirits. And the way these things are given is through oral tradition, and that oral tradition is embedded into each Odu Ifa, which is not written down. And if it's written down, it only accounts for about 2% of the totality of it. So each Orisha themselves have path of their own. So there's this oral tradition whereby back when these ancestral spirits still lived physically on earth, because they did, and in fact in certain places in West Africa, some of the mummified corpse of each of these ancestors still exists, and they were consecrated and still being used and invoked for certain things. And every now and then they'll bring them out and circumambulate the town or city with it for any given purpose or intent. But nonetheless, each of these Orishas have their own attributes. Some of them are known to be benevolent, some not so much. And those categories of benevolent or malefic are categorized into three, which is white, black, or red, which is where you will usually see people make reference to the three types of witches. They're white witch, they're black witch, they're red witches. Now, that's how it's categorized in that part of the world called West Africa. In the Western world, they usually have white, gray, black, or red. Meaning gray, which is kind of straddled between black and white. In West Africa, based on the form of expression it takes, based on the ley line of that geographical area, there's no in between. It's either you're white, you're black, or you're red. When we're speaking about these white, black, or red, we're not speaking about the way you physically look. We're speaking about spiritual attribute. The spiritual attributes that's concentrated into each Orisha, being white, black, or red, is white represents healing, protection, prosperity. Black represents hex and sometimes negativity. And red is basically pure battle, loss, anger, feud, sorrow, and if you really want to do some left-handed stuff, like human sacrifice and all that, that's the red. But I was brought up at the white one. But nonetheless, do know that the white, black, and red category intermingle with one another. It's not isolated, because all the Orishas, while they lived, and based on how principles of the universe work, it does not discern bad or good. Only we categorize that for our own protection. Because if we just approach everything as a whole, it might damage us because it is that powerful. So what we're going to be speaking about is mainly the white ones. So when you begin to look into the Orishas, you realize that some are white Orishas, some are black Orishas, and some are red Orishas. These are the huge caveat people need to look into when they're going into African spirituality. And based on the divination system, you can find out which Orisha is consecrated to your divinity. Just because you're a woman and you're looking for love doesn't necessarily mean you have to hang on to Oshun. Or just because you're a woman you think you're fierce and brave doesn't mean you always have to hang on to Oya. There are many more feminine divinities and ancestral spirits that is consecrated to your spirit and your Ori, and will be quicker to respond if you call upon them compared to the most popular ones that everyone is introduced to in the Western world. So one of the things that's done during the rite of passage is they consecrate your own individual Ori, because you yourself are considered to be a deity that's walking on earth by yourself. And they find out which pre-existing ancestral spirit is more closest to you when it comes to lineage, because even among the Yoruba people, there's still different subclans, and some of them don't even like each other. Some of them don't even get along. Some of them have internal feud because of ancestral feud in the past, whereby some ancestral spirits did not like each other, and that same feud is still playing out today. That exists amongst any given group of people in any part of the world. Think about it, it's there. So that same energetic essence lingers around some people harder and stronger than others. So that's why it's important for you to know which Orisha you're consecrated to. And when you're consecrated to it, you can call upon it. The good part about it is it's not just limited to your date of birth and your star chart. It goes far deeper than that, to a point where it might get a little bit creepy. So much so that if you find an honorable Babalawo to actually do your divination, not just some random one trying to steal your money, trying to inbox you on Facebook about some shit, or to put on the regalia of a Babalawo, but an actual real one, they will tell you the story of you from the day you were born that you didn't know, but it was a suppressed memory. They will tell you what's going on right now with you, up to what you're wearing, what you look like without seeing you. They will tell you your future. They will tell you your best pattern of what you're supposed to be doing, the best job, like you doing an astral relocation report with astrology. All of that exists within your file, believe it or not. But it might get a bit creepy for some people, because the thing about it is, when that divination is being done, you will feel the presence of that other person. Remember, in the past we were speaking about spiritual tools like mirrors being used. Believe it or not, sand can be used to access you. That's the reason why in Yoruba culture we will speak to our shoes, because we know that certain things exist beside the Ori. We also have the foot. There are two geolocations that we are consecrated to based on gravity, which is up and down. And those two centers have magnetic poles and energy that attract fortune one way or the other. One is your head and one is your foot. Energy comes through your foot and releases your foot. Energy releasing your head, it comes through your head. Just as much as the head is sacred. And on the note of the head being sacred, this is the reason why you see cultures wear fez, cap, hijab, turbans, because they know that the head is a sacred location. And it's the CPU for your central nervous system, which you use to attach to the corporate realm to send a message on a spiritual level based on how strong you've trained that spiritual muscle. But nonetheless, the leg is also very important, because if someone really wants to harm you spiritually, all they have to do is take some of the dust from your shoes to do something to you. So sand, dirt, earth. If you ever, on a very hot day when you're sweaty, take your nail. Let's be honest with each other now. We're humans. This happens to all of us. Take your nail and kind of scrape your skin. Scrape that dirt off your skin, and then put it on your hand, in between your index finger and your thumb, and kind of rub that dirt together, and you feel the essence of it. It's no different than if you were to take your hand and dig it into a wet soil and rub it together. It's earth. That's the reason why we turn back to dust when we leave this body. And that same dust, any given dust in any part of the world, can be taken and consecrated with a dust that naturally exists as a chemical element in your body based on one of the four primary elements beyond plasma. Plasma is another element people don't speak of. But people can take natural element and reach you. And that's one of the ways geomancy works, which is divination by sand, which part of that constitutes Ifa. Ifa can be done in many different ways. Certain powders are used in order to consecrate. But if you find someone very honorable, and someone who is honest and is not willing to take advantage of you, they will tell you a lot about you when it comes to introduction to this thing called African spirituality, which goes very deep, goes deeper beyond wearing certain colors, talking about certain Orisha and whatnot. But the ultimate truth is, you have your own Ori, your own self. You're a walking, talking divinity. And all you have to do is just access it, and you'll be able to do something with it. Ori in Yoruba belief occupies the center of sacredness, and how it is conceived is embedded in the Yoruba myth concerning the creation of man and the role played by his creator, Eleda, he who created. The Yoruba word for man, Eniyan, is derived from the phrase Eniyan, meaning the chosen one. The divine oracle, Ifa, according to Ajanaku, basically, so each Orisha has kind of like a passcode to them. So there's this phrase that's generally used in West Africa whereby they say words are the passcodes for magic to work. Meaning words are what you use, aka incantation. Kind of like the shorter version you would hear people talk about mirror, mirror on the wall, or you would hear some people who call themselves witches in the Western world. When they write certain things and it kind of rhymes, it seems almost like a joke. Those are incantations. Incantations are nothing but passcodes to reality. Because when certain sequence of words are used, it does something to the glands in your body that allows you to connect to a world that goes beyond the five senses. Because you and that thing you can't see are always connected, are never separated. So each Orisha and Ori, to which is a sacred center of you that you carry around every day that determines your destiny, the ebbs and flow of things, has a passcode also. That passcode are basically the incantations. Some comes in form of songs, some come in form of similitude, some come in form of just a few words. See, this world that you and I live in has a natural limiter attached to it. Like you would put a limiter into a turbo of a car or an engine, and then there's a switch that you flip, or how naturally there's an electric flow in an outlet in a room, and you flip a switch and a light bulb comes on. It doesn't mean that that electric switch prior to you flipping that switch did not exist. It's already there. But that switch that you flip is just a limiter that you set. Words, by way of incantations, and the different forms and derivatives that incantation comes in, are nothing but literally passwords. Like you have a password for your computer or your social media account or whatever it is. Words are passwords to reality. To flip that switch of limiter that naturally exists to allow the flow that exists. That's what incantations are. And incantations come in many different forms. Some comes in phrases, some come in idioms, some comes in literally hymns, singing, certain tones. Some come in the form of sequence. Some are just literally just one or two words, depending on what you intend to do. This is why they say spells, words, or like when you speak words, you're casting spells. This is the truth behind that, beyond some speculation. What makes words spells is that words are the passwords to reality that remove or flips the switch of limiter. That's the reason why you can understand or get something in some way until someone explains it in a different way. You get a better understanding of it. The same similitude and algorithm or switch of reality exists in the spiritual realm, whereby the electric flow naturally exists. All that's needed is just to flip that switch with a password through words called incantations and the different form they come in. So oftentimes when you begin to go into African spirituality, you will begin to see a lot of things that kind of rhymes, a lot of things that kind of go along almost like a story, but they're not stories. Those are passcodes for those who know what to look for. Then they give you the basic explanation, which those passcodes for each spiritual aspect and paths that one is studying, quote, African spirituality, in this case, West African spirituality, they'll usually be embedded into the oral tradition in and of themselves. And then they give you an extract from someone's writing regarding how this thing we call Ori, which is the root word for Orisha, which you yourself are an Orisha. And of course, as I said, when you go through this rite of passage, they let you know you yourself are one. And the first thing you need to cater to is your own Ori before you cater to any other Orisha. And there's this saying whereby your Ori is the only one that will always stay with you no matter what. Whenever any other Orisha fails you, because if you say you have an altar for Orisha in your house, I guarantee you there's someone somewhere who knows more than you that can annul that power of that Orisha that you say you have there, that you're giving food and doing all that stuff that people see on the internet or are introduced to because they've traveled to West Africa and they think they got it. Trust me, Whatever you're getting accounts for less than 1%. Now I'm just here to be honest with you. If you say you have a Ogun shrine, right? And Ogun is consecrated to certain attributes, and one of the things that could be used for it is a dog. All that's required by the other party is to do something with a dog that entity likes to associate with. Basically, they will bribe it to not protect you. And there's a saying when it comes to Ori, which you have, whereby your Ori will always stay with you, where other Orishas run away. And that is the importance of you catering to your own Ori, which is your divine self, your higher self, your sacred center, the one who came here with you before. Your Ori is the one that determines how you look, how you sound, who you're gonna meet and marry, how well you're gonna do in life, financially, spiritually, one way or the other. So you have to get to know your Ori first before anything else. Before you start going into Orishas. When I see people going to Orisha this and that, it makes me cringe. Why are you just skipping the most basic and the most important stuff, which is you, your own Ori, before you start going into some Oya, Oshun, Batala, all this? Hop off those Orishas nuts. Deal with yours, because you are the core and the source of it all. And someone honest with you who doesn't just want to take your money under the guise of divination will let you know this basic principle. Your Ori is the closest thing to a divine creator. And that is a fact. And there are certain ways you can actually call upon it and invoke it to bring quick good fortune. When people want quick monies, quick success, there are certain things you can do with certain consecration of similitude, which we'll be going over on the Patreon page. It goes on to say, among the Yoruba people, it is generally acknowledged that Eniyan is a special creature called Eda of God, Eleda, the creator. While Eniyan or Eni functions in the, aka person, functions in the Yoruba language as a common noun for human being, as different from other creatures. Ori serves as the umbilical cord. Connect the man with his God. In other words, your higher self. If you can cater to your Ori and learn about it, that's the first step to figuring everything out about you on this physical earth. The complete 57-minute video is on the Patreon page. Take care and best of luck.